All right, week 2 of doing this, the Nameless College Football Preview Show. I don't really have anything much better than that to call this. Did it last week as a premiere, and this week trying to do it live, and see if it's something people like. If people like it, we'll keep doing it through the year. If people don't care about it, then maybe we'll quit. Maybe we'll stop doing it and just kind of go back to canned videos and try to put stuff together that's thoughtful that people like. And so yeah, maybe that's how we'll figure it out. Week 2 though, trying to preview a little bit of college football. I've seen people complain about the slate. Obviously, I won't agree there. I thought Brooks Austin had a pretty good clip on that. So presented by BetUS, we'll talk about them in a moment. And, of course, appreciate their support. If you're watching, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, all those things. Let's roll for a few minutes on some big games this week. We're going to talk a little Nebraska, Colorado. I think that's a really fun one. Obviously, Michigan, Texas is probably your headliner of the week, the game of the week, I think, that we'll see. We got some other good stuff with Kansas State, Tulane. I think that's kind of an underrated, fun matchup. Tennessee, North Carolina State. That feels like one of those matchups where week 1, week 2 could look a little bit different. Tennessee did whatever they wanted. North Carolina State struggled at times against Western Michigan. I think they'll play a little bit better. We'll talk to Sports Talk Jay about that. We'll talk to John Kurtz about Kansas State's matchup, and then my guy Adam Carricker about the Nebraska-Colorado matchup. Can Colorado get to 2-0 and then 3-0 next week against Colorado State? I want to talk about the Big Three too. I know that a lot of people in here, a lot of people that watch the channel are Florida State, Miami, Florida. We've obviously talked a lot about those programs. That's what's closest geographically to me. That's what is closest to my heart. All three of those programs for different reasons, whether I like them or hate them. And then obviously that's where some pretty big storylines are in college football right now. Is the U back? Is Florida as bad as they looked? What the heck's going on in Tallahassee? So we'll talk about that too. And then anything you guys want. Obviously you can hit the comments. You can obviously chat at any point, and we'll certainly be happy to get some of your thoughts and takes there. So. All right, let's get rolling. Hey, what I do want to do is I want to jump right into a game, right into a little bit of a preview. I want to talk a little Nebraska, Colorado. I want to get my guy Adam Carricker on from the Carricker Chronicles. Let's chat with him to start this thing out. Nebraska, Colorado, Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Raiola. A lot of weapons there for Colorado. Can Nebraska handle it? They're a favorite at home. Can they get off this losing streak to Colorado? Let's talk to Adam and find out. All right, let's chat with Adam Carricker of the Carricker Chronicles. A big one this weekend. Nebraska, 7-point favorite against Colorado. Before we talk about that, I understand it's UTEP, but were you pretty pleased to see how the team and especially Dylan Raiola looked on Saturday?
Yeah, a little bit of a slow start. But first game of the year, true freshman quarterback. And honestly, it really wasn't Dylan. The whole entire offense was just kind of a little clunky in the beginning. It was 7-7 after the first quarter. UTEP caught the defense on that 1-3 play, up-tempo, 60-yard drive, long touchdown pass. I mean, but the rest of the way, Nebraska looked how Nebraska should look. The offense settled in. We are clearly going to be able to throw the ball much more efficiently and effectively this year. Dylan ran the offense. Took care of the ball, was efficient. What more could you ask of a true freshman quarterback in his first start? And honestly, the black shirts, they dominated the rest of the game. And before the end of the third quarter, Raiola was already out of the game.
Yeah. It's the way, it's so hard to take stuff away from a week 1 opponent like UTEP, but you come away, you can feel really bad about how some things go. And so when you're not left with that bad feeling of oh my gosh, we couldn't even take care of this team. So, Colorado comes to town this week. We were talking about it before we started recording. Their passing attack is nuts, right? And there's a lot of questions around their offensive line. Can that give Shedeur time to get to those weapons? And they didn't. They looked better. I'll say their offensive line looked better this last week than it did in 2023. But they also were playing an FCS opponent, a really good FCS opponent. Not to disparage North Dakota State. Is that to you? Is that where the game comes down to? Is what kind of pressure can Nebraska get to make him a little less comfortable?
Yeah, to me, the game's going to be won and lost in the trenches. Okay. Colorado's offensive line was more efficient at protecting the quarterback if you just look at sack numbers. North Dakota State only got to Shadur once. I do believe the hits, knockdowns, and pressures was right around 1 million, though. Okay, roughly give or take. Like they were all over him. The rushing attack for Colorado, they averaged just over 2 yards per carry. They're not really interested in running the ball. They're not great at running the ball. North Dakota State is one of the best FCS programs in America, and it's been that way for a decade or more. So they weren't just going to be a pushover. They weren't going to be intimidated. But Colorado won that game because they are far superior athletically. Yeah. They have Jimmy Horn, if not one of the fastest players in America, maybe the fastest. You got Travis Hunter, who's probably a top 1, 2, or 3 pick. You got Shadur, who's probably a top 10 to top 5 pick. Okay, so they've got great players. The question I have is about the rest of the team. The front seven, are you better? It was hard to tell versus North Dakota State. Their front seven on defense, the offensive line, it was hard to tell. You've got 3 great players, and I think about 19 question marks. They may be improved, they may not. It was hard to tell that first game, but 19 question marks in their other spots on that team. So they're going to come in wanting to throw the ball. Shooter's used to being under pressure. This is going to be nothing new to him. What was he sacked? Like 52 times last year, somebody told me. So he's used to getting rid of the ball under pressure. But if the Black Shirts can get there just a little bit faster than North Dakota State was able to, because I like to think the Black Shirts are a little bit faster, a little bit more athletic, with all due respect to North Dakota State, maybe some of those hits and pressures turn into sacks, knockdowns. Maybe not, because Shadur is really good at getting the ball out. We'll see.
Yeah, I wonder about their offensive line for sure against a much better, you would think, front in Nebraska. They didn't look great. You mentioned all the question marks. They didn't look great defensively against an FCS school. Now, I will say they saw a very veteran quarterback there, and we'll try and give as much respect to North Dakota State as we can. Different story this time with a true freshman. How do you think they look to attack Colorado when Dylan Rail is in the game and they're on offense?
I think in the beginning of the game, it might be similar to what you saw versus UTEP. They're going to run the ball, establish the run. It's going to be an insanely electric atmosphere. Let's calm the true freshmen down. Let's establish the running game. And then what they did early on was a lot of short passes, high completion percentage type passes. And then they eventually went to play action with a few passes over the top, which led to some touchdown passes for Nebraska in their first game versus UTEP. But I think you calm him down, you establish the run, you get him in a rhythm with some short completion, high percentage completion type passes, and then eventually you spread the defense out and go over the top if you're the Huskers.
You mentioned that electric atmosphere. I've already told my wife that I'm not traveling this weekend, but I kind of just want to book a flight to Lincoln and do it anyway, just to experience that on a game day. And then, obviously the circus that follows Coach Prime and that crew is, just kind of adds to that. So I am a little bit jealous of those that'll be up there. Slightly more confident in this game after seeing both teams week one. I know it's only 60 minutes of football, or slightly more concerned. Where do you kind of think you fall after watching, 60 minutes from both teams?
I mean, it's hard to tell what you're going to learn in one game. UTEP, they weren't very good last year. Okay, 3-9, got a brand new head coach, 11 Austin Peay transfers because that's where the head coach came from. So a lot of new first-year head coach. They weren't great. They're probably going to be one of the worst 15 to 20 teams in America until he can build that program up a little bit. That being said, all I wanted to feel after that game was that game went like it should, and that's how I felt after the Nebraska-UTEP game. So you got to take that away as a positive. Colorado, North Dakota State, everybody under God's hot sun is like North Dakota State's going to come in here and they're going to fight, scratch, claw, tooth and nail. They're a physical team. They're not going to be a pushover. And that's exactly what happened. But, man, it was hard to point to other areas of Colorado's team that were – what's better from last year? I can't look at the front seven and stopping the run game and say it was better. The back seven, they gave up some long touchdown passes. The offensive line, are they a little better at pass protecting, or was North Dakota State, as good as those players are, just not quite fast enough to get there that split second sooner to get the actual sack? I don't know. It's crazy because Colorado, North Dakota State kind of went the way people expected, but there's more question marks for them than I think Nebraska. But I don't know what we truly learned. It's hard to tell. We'll learn a lot more this Saturday night.
Yeah, and just playing a little more equal competition on both sides. I thought that, I do think I wonder what our perception would be if like that fluky interception to start because I did think Colorado's defense was better in the second half,
They
or
were.
North Dakota State's offense was struggling. If not for that fluky interception, they go up 10 there, and then they scored again in the second half, and then they're up 17. Do they play that? Does it end up going a little bit differently? Like even the touchdown they gave up in the second half was kind of garbage time. It wasn't technically garbage time, but it looked like prevent. Like you're gonna have to score onside kick, score again to beat us, and they obviously only got the score. So, I know we're not quite to game day yet. Have you done a prediction yet? Where do you think this one falls?
I will actually have former Colorado Buffalo Matt McChesney on my show of the Character Chronicles tomorrow morning. And Matt's great. He was a team captain, 3-year starter, all Big 12 type performer. He's got a beard. He always wears sunglasses. He's got this big scruffy voice, and he's got tattoos all over. He's a former D lineman, so he's freaking nuts. And I'm going to send him a message. Like I've interviewed him before. We've got great respect between each other. Our sons actually, their teams, 8th grade football teams actually played against each other, which was how we actually met in person for the first time. And so we have great respect, but I'm going to text him. Let's have a little fun with this one. Okay, so long story short, I have not made my prediction just yet. I know Nebraska is about a touchdown favorite at home. That sounds about right to me at this moment in time. I will say this. You make some great points. In the second half, and Dion even talked about it after the game, I think when he was interviewed by ESPN, they made some adjustments and their defense did play better. You got to give them credit for that. You could also argue the game came down to the very last play. You could also point out that coming into that game, North Dakota State had actually won 6 of their last 7 games versus FBS opponents. So again, what did we learn? I don't know. We're going to learn a lot more this Saturday.
Yeah. Where can folks find that show? Where can they follow you and get more of your work?
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is The Character Chronicles. You can also check out our website. We have a ton of phenomenal content providers from great shows out there on YouTube, writers as well at characterchronicles.com.
Awesome, man. Good luck this weekend. We'll be tuned in, and we're excited for it for sure.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I tend to lean Nebraska in this, like Adam was saying, but man, I don't think it can be underestimated what that passing attack, which may be the best in when you really consider their wide receiver talent and their quarterback. Colorado may have the best passing attack in the country. Now they also just refuse to run the ball, and there's a question of why they won't ever run. But their passing attack is elite. I lean Nebraska here. We'll talk about that game a little more fully later. Hey, I do want to give some love to BetUS. Make sure that you're using the BetUS link in our description. You get 125% deposit bonus match when you use that link to sign up. That is up to your first $2,000 on your first 3 deposits. BetUS, great lines, great customer service. They will certainly get you taken care of. Appreciate them for their support. NFL season starting tonight. You can obviously go bet on that game there, and then all of the college football action that'll happen this weekend. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Big 3 in Florida. Certainly a weird time for them. Certainly a frustrating time for fans of 2 of those teams, and then maybe a joyous time for the other. Florida State, Miami, Florida. I actually want to do pretty specific stuff on all of these teams, but Florida State and Florida, watching them right now, like I don't know who's the bigger, what's the bigger issue. I mean, I guess Florida's only had to play 1 game, and Florida State's kind of shown that they're not very good over 2, and it was in games that they were favorites in, and I guess if you're Florida, you weren't expecting to be good. As far as like the overall program, I mean, at least Florida State won some games the last couple of years, and Florida's maybe used to this, but man, Florida, to just get dog walked by a rival that hired a coach the same year as you, and man, it's rough at both places. I don't know that it's significantly better anywhere. Florida State has a little bit of recent good to kind of remember back on, I guess, and in Florida, it's been pretty bad for a while. But Florida also had an over-under win total of 4.5. And so, for them to come out and lose to a team that has a win total of 9.5, the way they lost is certainly bad, but I don't know where it's worse. But then obviously you got Miami, who, people expected to be really good. We are only a weekend, but when you look at Miami's schedule, and the reason we picked them to go and get 10 wins at least, was because of that schedule and thinking that they would beat Florida to start it off, and then knowing that they're not going to lose to FAMU, they're not going to lose to Ball State, they're probably not going to lose to USF. That looks like Virginia Tech's kind of a joke at this point. So they're going to run off a lot of wins, and they got to go to the West Coast to play Cal. They should certainly win that. They got that tough stretch in the middle with Louisville on the road, Florida State at home. They play Duke, which that shouldn't be a big deal, and then at Georgia Tech. That 3 games in 4 looks like the only real possibility of a week that they could lose. But they're going to be favored in every game for the rest of the year. Could they lose on the road at Louisville? Could they lose on the road at Georgia Tech? Could the rivalry against Florida State trip them up? I mean, absolutely. Any one of those 3 things happen. It would shock me if they lost 2 of those games. And it would surprise me if they lost any of them, the way they looked week 1. Now, teams a lot of times look really, really good week 1, and they're not able to sustain. So can Miami sustain? That'll be the question. Can Florida State, Florida turn things around? I tend to think that Florida is not quite as bad as we saw, and Miami might be a little better than we thought. And then also, like, once you get down, you get down. If Napier hasn't lost the team, which I've heard conflicting things on what that sideline was like during the game, if Napier hasn't lost the team, then I think Florida can rebound. Probably not well enough to keep his job, but I think they can get a little bit better. Florida State, man, I don't know. They got pushed around by a mediocre BC team in Doak Campbell Stadium at home. Didn't look like they cared, and they got to figure stuff out through the bye week. If they don't, then that will be their season. If they lose against Memphis at home, a group of 5 team where Norvell used to coach, that has about a 10th the operating budget that Florida State has from an NIL perspective and a program perspective, that would be pretty bad news. So, all right, let's talk a little bit of Tennessee, NC State. My guy, Sports Talk Jay, one of the very best YouTubers here on the platform, does a phenomenal job. Let's get Sports Talk Jay in and chat with him. All right, we're back with Sports Talk Jay, talking a little Tennessee, NC State this weekend, a ranked matchup, although after watching North Carolina State last week, having a little bit of a scare with Western Carolina, maybe they're lucky to even still be ranked at this point. But let's talk a little first about Tennessee's win last week. Nico looked pretty good. Obviously, you're playing Chattanooga. Like, you're playing a team that you need to do exactly what they did too. But it's hard to take things away from games like that, Jay. But thoughts after that? Were you encouraged at all? Is there anything you're concerned about coming off of the win? I mean, I know you won by $1 billion, but it's hard to get much out of those FCS opponents.
Yeah, it just confirmed what I knew about Nico. A lot of people were trying to say, well, he only threw for like under 200 yards in that bowl game. And I was like, he was the MVP. He scored 4 touchdowns. And he got sacked 6 times because we had 3 guys that had opted out for injury and et cetera. And he didn't throw a single wide interception. So I was like, I just want to see him connect for a few hundred yards and just prove what I already know, which he did immediately. Yeah. Immediately, within 20 minutes, he had 300 yards, and I was like, 3 touchdowns. Okay, get him out. Just get him out. We don't need to see any more. Let's go to the NC State game, and that's it is what it is.
So NC State this weekend opened up at a 4-point spread. It's up to 8 now. And ESPN says that you guys have an 87.9% chance to win it. I know that's kind of rat poison, as Lane Kiffin likes to say. Still a talented team, but Grayson McCall doesn't look great. What about NC State does worry you, though?
The only thing that concerns me is our secondary. That's been our weak link. Our nemesis really has been we just can't stop the pass. We can stop the run. They'll not run on us. They just won't. They'll get 90 yards, something like that on the ground if they're fortunate. But Grayson McCall, if he plays like he did at Coastal Carolina the first couple of years there, he could get a lot of yards. He could get 300, 350, something like that. And he's got some wide receivers. That Concepcion guy is excellent. Yeah, he's really good. Got another guy by the name of Hollywood that is kind of an all-purpose dude, running back, wide receiver. That's another guy that could give us fits in the secondary. That's my only concern there. We're going to score. We'll score. That's not a problem. I don't think they can stop us. They're going to try to stop the run, which is what they should do. And if they put 8 in the box, we'll kill them. So they can't do that. They're going to have to put 6 in the box. So we'll get our 150, 200 yards rushing, no trouble. It's just they need Nico to have an off night. That's what needs to happen. Nico needs to have an off night, and McCall needs to be the guy he was 2 years ago.
Which, Nico's young. And I know that, he looked really good last week. A step up in competition for sure. You mentioned Concepcion having 9 receptions, 3 touchdowns last week. Like he is something special. Like he's one of the better wide receivers in the country. My concern for NC State though is can Grayson be that guy? I don't think he looked incredibly sharp last week. Now, there eventually becomes a time where you're just that much better than, who did they play? Western Carolina.
Yeah.
At that point you're thinking you can, you're thinking you can eventually just will your way to a win there. Going away from Knoxville, obviously it's a neutral site game as opposed to being a true road game. So even that advantage, I feel like is gone for NC State and helps Tennessee a ton. What are the ramifications if Tennessee's not able to get this one? Is everybody is there a meltdown? Like, what are the thoughts around it?
There'll be shock. There'll definitely be shock in Knoxville. Something will have to happen. We'll have to turn the ball over at least 3 times, I would think. McCall will have to have a great game. We'll have a meltdown about our secondary if we lose, because that'll be the case. Nico, I just can't see, unless he were to, have a mishap of some sort, he's going to play well. I've seen him. He started 2 ball games. He's been the MVP in both, and one was against a top 10 defense. So that's not normal. Quarterbacks don't do that in their first game. Most of them struggle, unless they're really elite, and that's what this kid is. He's elite, and he's got the wide receivers we've got are just an embarrassment of riches. Honestly, it's one of the best receiving groups I've seen Tennessee have in a long time. And running backs, we're just good everywhere on offense, and we're good on the defensive line and special teams. We've got one weakness, and we have brought in a bunch of 4-stars and a bunch of all-conference guys, but we've got battered ball syndrome from that secondary. We're all tore up about it, and we don't trust it until we see it. And that's the one place where we're weak. And if they'll hit that hard, that gives them a chance in this game. That gives them a fighting chance. They'll have no home field advantage because we travel fantastically. There's tickets available, which means we're buying tickets. It'll probably be worst case scenario. It'll be 50-50 as far as fan bases.
Yeah. Maybe even worse though. 60, I could see 60-40 Tennessee.
Yeah. And it's in their home state.
Yeah. Without blinking my eyes. They NC State's crowd has always been fairly good. Like I've been to games, they've come to Tally and stuff and they've done a good job, but yeah, I don't, they ain't like Tennessee fans traveling. And they certainly don't have as large of a fan base either, which contributes to it. What about, all right, so we'll come back to talk about this NC State game and we'll wrap up there in just a minute. But we've talked a lot about the Florida curse, and it's certainly been more of a curse down in Gainesville. But man, watching them on Saturday, do you think that are you less nervous about that game? Is it possible for you to be less nervous about the game against Florida, or do you think Miami's just that good, or where do you think about them?
I could see Florida. I wish it was. I always want our game to be later in the season because occasionally Florida, their team will just quit on them. If they get things going bad, this is a team that's loaded, but they'll go 4-8 on you like that if things aren't going right. I've seen them quit on McElwain. They quit on the guy from Mississippi State.
Mullen Muschamp.
Yeah, that's right. And they're going to quit on I think they may have already quit on Napier. We'll see. Miami was really good. They had a great quarterback, Cam Ward, who y'all should have got. That was a monster mistake not to get that guy. You should have just paid whatever it took. Now, of course, that's hindsight. But I don't think Florida's as bad as everybody thinks they are. They got a ton of talent, probably as good as what we've got in many respects. But their motivation is terrible. Napier's not doing a good job of motivating them. I can't believe they went down there and whooped them in the swamp like that. That crowd was whipped up. I mean, you were there. That was a wild crowd at 3:30 in that heat. I mean, it was intimidating, honestly.
It was awesome. Yeah, and that's what I've told people. If you would have told me, that's why I went. My team wasn't playing. I could have just already been up at a bar watching all the rest of the games. If you'd have told me it's going to be a 30-point game, or I guess it finished at 24, but if you'd have told me it's going to be a blowout, the crowd's never going to get into it. It's not going to be fun, and you're not going to be able to watch all the other college football games that are going on that day, I wouldn't even have gone. Like, what's fun about the swamp is going and feeling the swamp, and they had nothing to cheer for. There was nothing to be excited about, minus one long touchdown run. And so, yeah, I agree. They play Samford this weekend, and it'll really come down to nothing matters there. I mean, Lagway's starting because the Mertz is in concussion protocol, but nobody will care. They could win that by 70. Nobody cares. It'll come down to what happens against A&M. And A&M's defense looked really good against Notre Dame. So I'm afraid if they start out 0-2 against real competition, or so 1-2 overall, they lose to A&M next week. I think that's the writings on the wall that's it for Napier.
Yeah, you may be right. I don't think they'll fire him right away, but at some point, it takes a little bit of time on that. I mean, maybe week 6, week 7, week 8, something like that. They'll let him go, depending on how bad it gets. Now, they might beat Mississippi State, which is their next game, but then they've got like Kentucky and UCF, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and then of course the gauntlet. Yeah. So at some point, if he makes it into the gauntlet, I'm almost a little bit surprised, but somewhere in that gauntlet is where you want to let him go. If I was the AD, I'd wait until the gauntlet and say, let Georgia just pound him by 40 points. Let him go right after that.
That's what they did with McElwain. That's when they let him go, was after, and there was other stuff going off the field too. But yeah, they lost by $1 billion to Georgia, and then it was like, all right, well, that's enough of that. You can kind of save your season if you win that. So, all right, transitioning right back to your team, and then we'll get out of here. We talked about, I know you feel really confident. Do you have a lean? Do you have a score? Have you done a score prediction yet? Do you have one that we'll do?
I went with 37-24. I think NC State's going to score on us. I just do. I think they'll get 20 points, 24 points, something like that. I would expect us to get in the mid to high 30s. If things go really well for us, we might get into the 40s. I don't think anything more than that. If we're in the 20s, we got a ball game. Yeah. If we're in the 20s, we got a ball game.
I want to get you back Oklahoma week, which is in 2 weeks from now, because I do think that's going to be one of the bigger ones.
That's a big game, man.
That's a big one, man, at home. Honestly, I think we play Cal that weekend, and I don't know that I could stomach a loss to a West Coast ACC team. And so maybe I'll just try and find a way to get up to Knoxville that weekend instead of doing anything else. Because you play Alabama, you play Georgia, and those are incredibly tough. But it almost feels like if they beat Oklahoma, they could lose those other two and still make the playoff, And so that'd kind of be, I don't know. I'm not to do a full season preview right here, but I think that game's going to be just so massive for Tennessee. If you go 10-2 in the SEC, I think you're certainly in. But same thing for Oklahoma. They got to play Texas. They got to play, a lot of good teams. And so they need that win as well. I think that game's going to be just absolutely electric in Knoxville this year. And like I said, I need to find a way to sneak up there.
There's a lot of additional emphasis in that game because Josh Heupel's returning.
Yeah, sure.
The national champion is returning, runner-up in the Heisman, and he got fired by Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Fired as an offensive coordinator because he couldn't figure out a way to score.
Well, doesn't have that problem now, it seems. Jay, where can people follow you? Where can they find your work?
I'm at Sports Talk Jay on YouTube. That's about it. I don't go on a whole lot of much anything else. I just enjoy doing the YouTube stuff.
Skip all the rest of it. I've found the people on, and I'm on everything else. I found the people on YouTube are a little more kind. Like I get Miami fans sending me death threats on Twitter, and on YouTube they're like, "Man, this was a really good, thoughtful analysis you had here." And I'm just like, "Yeah, they're a lot more kind on YouTube than they are on Twitter." There's some crazy.
That is, I can tell you, I was looking. I'm thinking about doing a video on mean comments, and I went because I thought it'd be fun, and I would respond to it, and try to do it the way I like to do things. And I struggled finding anything that was really I could work. It was amazing. It's like, why in the world Florida fans ought to be killing me right now?
Yeah,
they should be wearing me out.
They've been neutered. They've been neutered at this moment, brother. I think I'll tell you why. I think it's a little bit of an older demographic. I think my Twitter demographic skews from 16 to 40, and my YouTube demographic is more 35 to 55. And so people aren't, you eventually grow up and you're not sending death threats over football games, but when you're 18, this stuff is I'll kill your whole family if my team loses next week. When you're 30, you start to get out of that a little bit, I think.
My demographic's over 50. I'll go ahead and tell you. I've looked at it. I have a very, very older demographic, and they're incredibly kind to me, which just shocks me. Occasionally, somebody will put a negative comment, and there'll be like 10 people that'll jump that
Jump
person.
on them, yeah.
It's
People,
amazing. It's like I deserve to take crap because I give a lot of crap. But for some reason, they've been reasonable. Now, if I got on Twitter, you're probably right. I'd probably get death threats.
people are the worst over there. I wish I could delete it. So,
Yeah.
Jay, your audience does do a great job. Anytime we do content, they always are coming and super supportive. So you've done a good job building that for sure. So, well, we appreciate you. Good luck this weekend, and go get after it.
Okay, see you, man.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay, bye bye.
Sports Talk Jay is probably one of my favorite people that we end up getting to chat with. I love Adam Carricker. I love John Kurtz, who we'll talk to in a minute. But I love Sports Talk Jay. If you're a fan of his or if you're not a fan of his, either way, go check out his channel. He does a phenomenal job. I have a hard time seeing NC State win this. Jay is obviously super confident. I have a hard time seeing NC State win this thing, but football is a weird sport. I don't know how many people thought Boston College was going to win or Georgia Tech the week before that. So weird things do happen. Another really big one. Actually, I think this one's kind of underrated, but man, Tulane versus Kansas State is going to be a fun game. And, I know people are excited about Texas, Michigan. I know people are excited about other games, but Tulane, Kansas State is going to be a ton of fun. John Kurtz does a phenomenal job on here as well. These are guys that I certainly look up to and think that they've built amazing communities and hope to be able to do something like that, replicate that at some point as we continue to bring you content. But John Kurtz on Kansas State, obviously they got off to the 1-0 start last week. Can they get to 2-0? Can they continue to be ranked? And kind of move up in the Big 12, the view of the Big 12. So let's talk with John Kurtz. Then we'll talk a little Michigan, Texas. We'll make some picks, and we will get out of here. All right, welcome back. College Football Addiction. I have John Kurtz from the John Kurtz Show here on YouTube. We're going to talk a little bit about this matchup this weekend with Kansas State and Tulane. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, TJ. Thanks for having me, man.
Better than I am, right? At a 1-0 at a 1-0 clip. All right, we'll talk a little bit about Tulane and that matchup here in just a moment. But just thoughts on the opening week for Kansas State. Anything that concerns you after week one. I know it's sometimes hard to take a lot away pending who the matchup is. But just overall thoughts on a 35-point win against UT Martin.
Yeah, so they were playing, obviously, FCS opponent. I mean, UT Martin's a back end of the top 25 FCS team that have won their league 3 years in a row. So solid, but certainly not North Dakota State, South Dakota State, some of the teams that we saw others in the Big 12 playing. Pretty businesslike, and it really felt like K-State treated it a lot like a preseason game. For starters, the defense was dominant. The only 6 points that they gave up were a couple of field goals after a fumbled kickoff return and Avery Johnson's one interception of the game that was a turnover. So really, if you give them a clean slate to work with, the defense didn't allow any points. They gave up under 40 rushing yards on 30-plus rushing attempts. It was just over a yard per carry that they allowed. So pretty dominant, and that was kind of the expectation that the defense was going to be ahead of the offense. There's a lot of buzz about the defense coming out of fall camp and how good they can really be, and they did that even while being a little bit banged up at linebacker, which I think they'll get some help with that back on Saturday against Tulane. So that was the good. Special teams also scored for them, got a block punt. The kicking situation, which there was some concern about this year, looked pretty good, both kicking and punting in week one. Now, obviously, I'm avoiding the offense here, and there's a lot of hype about Avery Johnson and company, and for the most part, the offense did fine. It was just the passing game is what needs some work. Clearly, they could run the ball. DJ Giddens, who's one of the best running backs in the country, went over 100 yards. He just did DJ Giddens things, looked like himself. A pretty new offensive line where they lost a lot last year was actually really impressive to me. But it just seemed like Avery Johnson a lot of times was locking in on his first read, not getting through the rest of the reads, missed some open receivers. When he ran, the offense looked great, but they did not do that very much. In fact, he only had one actual designed quarterback run. So that was a part of it. If they wanted to really get out and score, they could have done it with his legs. I think it's clear. Like, they know they're going to have to throw the ball better than they did on Saturday to actually win at the clip that they want to this year. So that's kind of the concern coming out of the game, I think, for K-State fans is like, hey, everything looked pretty good and like it should. And Avery Johnson has a world of talent and has great arm talent. It's just going to take some time, probably as a true sophomore, for him to develop some consistency there in the passing game.
So you get Tulane this week, double-digit favorite. ESPN's FPI, which I don't necessarily think is the end-all, be-all, but just from another point of reference, says you guys have about a 55% chance of winning that game. So not as friendly as Vegas. They're based on the advanced analytics, the metrics. They also played Southeast Louisiana or something like not again, it almost reminds me of like, having the Southeast there. Not to, if we have any Southeast Louisiana fans tune in, I'm very sorry. But it almost reminded me of playing in the video game, and it's like FCS Southeast.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that is it. So, but got to go and play Tulane. What is it about Tulane that probably gives you the most? We'll start more positive. Where do you think they can take advantage of? What's the matchup that you feel like Kansas State has an edge in there?
Yeah, I really like the matchup that K-State will have with its defense against the Tulane offense. They scored 50-plus points against Southeast Louisiana, but they only had 13 offensively in the first half. They got a pick six right at the end of the first half that made the score look a little better at halftime, and then they started to get rolling in the second half. But Ty Thornton, who's an Oregon transfer, who a lot of people thought was going to win that quarterback job, and I think has the most upside there, but he didn't. He got beat out for the starting quarterback job by a guy who's much less heralded and still pretty young. So I think K-State's defense, which got a ton of pressure on the quarterback on Saturday in the opener against UT Martin, should be able to tee off, get some pressure, and probably force some turnovers. So I think that's where I really think K-State will be able to control the game. I don't expect Tulane to really be able to move the ball very well. I mean, the pass rush last year was not great for K-State, but they have a lot of young talent that's been coming up in the program, kind of ready to unleash that this year. And we saw one of those guys, Toby Osensami, have a 1.5 sacks, and he had another one literally in his grasp, let it go away. It would have been 2.5 sacks, and he had 6 pressures on 10 snaps. So he's a guy that can really get after it as a pass rushing specialist. I think they'll kind of unleash him and Desmond Purnell, a linebacker, flying all over the field, and the secondary is probably the strength of the defense. So I don't think Tulane is going to have a very easy time scoring much. I think as long as K-State can manufacture a couple of scoring drives from their offense, they probably will be okay here. But it is interesting you bring up the numbers, because I've seen a lot of variance there. I've seen some people looking at it saying, hey, my model actually has this as more like K-State by 2 touchdowns. So they're pretty enticed by seeing the line anywhere from -8 to -10. Whereas I thought, when we went into this week, I was like, man, I feel like Tulane's probably going to be like a popular upset pick here, but I don't know. So there really does seem to be like about a touchdown variance between different people's models and spreads, like FPI, which is about as high as anybody on Tulane out there. And Kelly Ford, I know, who's a guy a lot of people follow. His model after last week actually knocked it down from like a 70% K-State win to like 58%. So there are a couple there that are starting to feel the green wave a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's so hard, man, early in the year to accurately handicap this stuff, and accurately like try and find the money on either side. And obviously Tulane had a good year last year. They were in contention there late for possibly making the New Year's Six, but just not. It's tough to know. Is your you talked about the passing game. Is that your concern this week? What are your thoughts on Tulane's defense, Kansas State being able to move the ball there?
Yeah, I would say so. I think for K-State fans, the 2 talking points really this week are, hey, we got to get the passing game going more. I think the good news is it seemed like receivers were getting open for the most part, whereas in the past, K-State's receiving core has not been the strength of the team. You think of K-State, you think of them running the ball generally. Now, they had a pretty good receiving core a couple of years ago when they won the Big 12, but for the most part, since Tyler Lockett left in 2014, it's always left something to be desired. So I think there's a natural inclination for the fans to be like, oh man, like, is the receiver room just not good enough again? I think they do have some talent there, and I think guys were getting open, which is a problem I would rather have as opposed to the opposite there, where the quarterback's just looking around like, hey man, no one's getting open, because I think you can develop that. I think you can get better with that. I think you can get back in the film room and be okay. The other thing, honestly, is just a little bit of trauma from a couple of years ago. I mentioned that team that won the Big 12. K-State played Tulane 2 years ago when Willie Fritz was still the coach, and they got beat in Manhattan the year that they won the Big 12 by Tulane, and that was a really rough game. They were still playing Adrian Martinez at quarterback at that point. And speaking of passing game struggles, they could not throw the ball very well at all throughout that game. And it was a really disappointing loss. Now, it looked a lot better by the end of the year because Tulane went to the Cotton Bowl and beat USC. So that was actually a pretty salty Tulane team. I don't know that this team is that. And in fact, listening to head coach John Summerall talk at his press conference this week, he basically said the same thing. Like, if we play like we did on Saturday in our opener, we're going to get drilled. So I think he doesn't feel like they're there yet either. But Summerall is a really good coach, and another weird connection in all this. He was the coach at Troy, who K-State played last year. So they do have some familiarity there. K-State won that game rather easily, but got pushed a bit in the first half. So these two teams are fairly familiar with each other from a bunch of different angles, which does add some intrigue to the matchup.
Playing this on the road, I don't know that this is going to be like an insane environment to go into, if we're just being honest, but playing this on the road and then having a massive game, what if you win, should be a ranked-on-ranked matchup against Arizona in just 6 days. Do you worry about the look ahead? Do you worry about the trap, or maybe losing a couple years ago kind of helps them avoid that? Or just any thoughts? And we may have to have you back next week because that should be another big matchup. But just thoughts on playing a big one right after this FCS opponent?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, group of five opponent, not an FCS.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like it helps a little bit, actually. I think that K-State lost that game a couple of years ago. Not that there are a ton of guys left around, but there are a handful, and I think that will help kind of get everybody's attention there. Plus, Tulane's been a good program the last few years with Willie Fritz. Like, that's been a double-digit win per year program that's had a lot of success, and even this year, they're picked third in the AAC preseason poll. So I think they have become enough of a program that they command some respect. And yeah, it is your first road trip. I think that will likely get guys' attention. I did see, people talking on Twitter today about the fact that there are a lot of empty seats remaining. So I don't expect it to be a super packed house or raucous environment, but you do have to worry about, I think, like the heat and humidity and what that can do, and maybe utilize some depth there, go a little bit deeper with your rotations. But K-State did a lot of that anyway in week one. So I don't have a ton of concern about that, and I think they will be really up for the Arizona game. Honestly, the one I worry about a little bit more is after that, they have to go to BYU, and that's in between games with Arizona and a road trip to Colorado, which will obviously be pretty high-profile matchups just based on the caliber of opponents there. So I'm not totally worried. I could be wrong, but I think you will get a pretty focused effort out of them. The other thing that helps, too, is I think especially the offense knows, like, hey, we could have been a lot sharper in week one. We only scored 13 offensive points in the first half. Like, we need to be better. So I think they'll be locked and ready to go.
Do you have a lean on this? Do you have a score prediction just yet that you've done?
Yeah, I'm kind of hovering like right on what we've seen a lot of the lines out there be. I think I predicted on our show 27-17. I expect it to be a little more low scoring. I haven't actually looked at the over-under, so I guess my lean on that would definitely be toward the under. I think K-State will win relatively comfortably, but it will be at least a game where Tulane's going to be within striking distance, and K-State may have to hold them off there. But I think there's a lot of, I would just call it like cautious optimism that K-State's going to go in and handle their business right now. Honestly, I sense a little bit less in terms of nerves from the fan base about this game than I did maybe like in the middle of July or August when people were talking about the schedule. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I think K-State wins, but I do think it will be relatively close.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you're just under there. Over under 48.5 is what I found quickly. So, John, where can people find you? Where can they follow you for not just K-State, not just Big 12? I need to do realignment, but where can folks find more of your work?
Yeah, appreciate that. On YouTube, it's just John Kurtz, JOHNKURTZ on YouTube. If you want to check out the live shows on Wednesdays and Sundays and the other content that's there, a lot of realignment and a lot of Big 12 and just everything going on in college football. If you're a Big 12 fan, check out my newsletter. It's called Open for Business, ofbnews.com to get subscribed to that. And if you're a K-State fan, I do the 3MA podcast, like EMA, but with a 3, wherever it is that you find your podcast. And you can follow me on Twitter at JOKurtz.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate you.
No problem, TJ. Anytime, man.
I appreciate John for his time. And yeah, I think Tulane was a fun team last year. I think they could be, pretty fun this year too. They off to a good start, but I have a tough time seeing them win that at home. So, all right, I'll pick some of these and then talk a little Texas Michigan and get out of here. I appreciate you guys for tuning in live or watching the replay, whichever you have done. I actually like Kansas State to cover in that one. Last week, not to pat myself on the back too hard, I think we hit on everything except for Florida State, Boston College, and then missed on Penn State, West Virginia. So, but hit on Florida, Miami, hit on Georgia, hit on the LSU game, hit on Notre Dame. So a good week. I think we went 4-2 on the week. Let's try and beat that this week. So I like Kansas State to cover. I actually think I like Tennessee to cover as well. I think they kind of run away from NC State. So give me the Vols in that one. We also spoke with Nebraska, Colorado, Adam Carricker. I want to take Colorado with the points, but I think Nebraska wins and wins close. I think that Colorado's offense will keep them in it, and they'll keep scoring. But I think Nebraska wins. So either way, I'll take Colorado with the points on that one. And the big one, the Michigan game, I think that one is just so interesting. Two conflicting styles. Texas wants to push the ball up and down the field as much as Quinn Ewers and them can. Michigan, certainly a different vibe there. I don't know if Michigan's going to have enough offensively. When we did our Michigan preview this year for the season, I believe I took Michigan to win this game. I don't know that I have the same confidence right now. I will say I like Michigan plus 7.5 right now on BetUS because of that hook. If it gets under 7, I think I'd lean Texas. I'm not saying that Michigan can't pull this upset. I lean the offense here, having a little bit more success. I think if Michigan can force Texas to be one-dimensional, if they can completely take the run away, which Texas has got some issues at running back right now. If they can completely take the run away and force them to be pretty one-dimensional, then I think they'd have a shot. Otherwise, I don't know that they can do enough. I don't have enough confidence in them offensively to move the ball consistently. They're going to try and play keep away. They're going to try and slow things down. They're going to try and pound the rock. We may have a Michigan-specific preview that comes out later, but I would lean Texas winning this. I'll take Michigan for the cover at home, especially at 7.5. If it's down to 7, 6.5, I'd probably go with Texas. But at 7.5, I'll take Michigan to cover there. So 2 dogs, 2 favorites. Michigan, Colorado to cover, 1 at home, 1 on the road. And then I like the neutral site, Tennessee to cover. And then, again, on the road, I like Kansas State to cover as well. Undecided on how often we'll do this. Thinking once a week. Would like to see it grow a little bit. But if you have ideas, if you want to tell us, like, hey, change the name to this, we're calling it the Nameless College Football Show right now, the preview show. So if you like that, great. If not, no worries. But want to share some insight, want to give you some thoughts. Again, you can go over to BetUS and use our link to bet on any of these games that you've kind of gotten breakdowns of that we've talked about. We'll have more content coming out this week, so make sure that you are subscribed. I appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon here on College Football Addiction.